one thing that we share all the time from our experience in the military is that when the bullets start flying, the first thing that the people will do is they're going to look to their leader. And what their leader does, they will replicate. And so you have to learn to model some of that calm in the chaos. And I think that helps you start to see more clearly.
We get it. You're busy. You want to grow, and we want to help. You're passionate about your craft because it deeply matters to you. Your faith is important. It's your foundation. At Stay Forth, we coach leaders to avoid burnout, live and lead with clarity, purpose, and from a place of health. We want you to experience long-term impact. Welcome to the journey. Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Alan, thanks for having me.
I love podcasting. One of the reasons is because I get to meet new people. So you're a new friend that I know we're going to look back in a year and go, man, why did it take us so long to connect? I love some of the spaces that you're in, but it looks so unique for you. Military experience over a decade there, been leading people for over 25 years. So just kind of take us back to the military and how that shaped you for exactly what you're doing with organizations and companies today.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Alan. I mean, I always knew since I had memories that I wanted to be a soldier. That's all I really ever thought I was going to do. And so I joined the Army straight out of high school. After passing all the prerequisites, I was assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion, so Special Operations Unit. And then I was there for just about a decade. And one of the great things that I got to do, in addition to serving on the front lines of American policy, I did 4 rotations to Afghanistan. I actually was in the Middle East 8 days after the towers fell on 9/11. But one of the neat things that I got to do was I got to be a part of the assessment and selection and the development team for future leaders of the Ranger Regiment. So I got to assess, mentor, develop over 1,000 Ranger leaders. And that was a really great experience for me. Candidly, for me, it felt very much like it was a choice. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to hold my family together if I had stayed in the military. So I ended up departing. And what I have found over, these last 16 years out of service is that all of the foundational elements of leading teams to execute no-fail missions in ambiguous and asymmetrical environments that I experienced as a special operator has translated so well into the commercial sector. I was a leader on the front line of a team as we went through a $7 billion healthcare organization total restructure. That's very difficult. I had the opportunity to help scale a national veteran serving nonprofit from an idea to 211 cities, helping 150,000 veterans reconnect to their communities after experiencing some of the bloodiest years of the war. I've had the opportunity to serve in leadership positions in the child welfare space with Colorado's oldest nonprofit. And, really all of the foundational elements of being a Ranger in a period of war leading teams has helped me kind of navigate through the complexity of growth, change, and adversity. And that's what we do every day with Applied Leadership Partners, is that we come alongside leaders that are doing good things in the world and just kind of want to sharpen their axe a little bit, want to increase their effectiveness and increase it for the long haul. Some of the stuff that you're working in anti-burnout, I mean, I'm seeing that all over the place right now. And so I would say that just having that experience as a young man leading people in war has helped me to kind of see some of the nuggets of wisdom, but then translate it out into what Blaine and I affectionately call us the real world.
And we're really both in the field of adaptive leadership because we're going places where we haven't been before. And if it's, a large company scaling and becoming mega, or how do we lead in these complex times, it's real. And how do we do so as leaders, not getting decision fatigue or worn down, and ultimately bringing our worst selves to work? What are you seeing the pressures, maybe top 3 or 4 pressures that leaders are carrying who are, at the top of teams or at the top of orgs?
I love how you've incorporated fatigue. Blaine and I talk a lot with leaders about something that we call justification fatigue. So that's one of the things that we see a lot. There's this cycle where a lot of folks are really clamoring for transparency in the world right now. They're really asking for transparency, and they're not crazy for doing it, right? We happen to be in a season of life where there is low trust in large institutions and organizations. There's been ever since, the 2000s kicked in, you really see all this uncertainty that has exacerbated. So people are asking for transparency, and it's not a bad thing. They're not crazy. Um, and then leaders on the other side of things are kind of just asking for a little bit of follow through, a little bit of, can you do the thing? And what we see a lot is that we get into this unhealthy cycle here of, this transparency, ask for transparency, ask for follow through from the leader down. And I think what really people are looking for is trust at the center. I think transparency in many ways becomes like a veiled word where we're really just looking for trust. Can I trust you as my leadership? And leaders, can I trust you to do the thing? And so justification fatigue is one of the things that we see a lot of leaders kind of going through because, frankly, most of the leaders that we work with, these are people that are very thoughtful. They're trying very hard. They're trying to be over communicative. They're trying to make sure that people not only understand the why, but that they can see themselves in accomplishing the why, in really the mission. And so I think that's one of the things. And so we really commonly vector them back into, is it really trust that we're looking for? Blaine and I talk a lot about there's no shortcut to relationships. So you can't just slap the table and say we all trust each other, but you can build speed to trust. We share a model that we find effective called the CARE model: candor, authenticity, reliability, and empathy are 4 ingredients that can help build some speed to trust. And so that's one of the things that we find a lot. And then I would say another thing that we see a lot of leaders really wrestling through is the loneliness of leadership. And we really try to encourage, we just wholly reject the idea that leadership is a lonely place. Completely reject that. Like, it does not have to be a lonely place. Leaning on each other, especially where you're going through adversity, is really important. Finding those ways to delegate not just authority, but delegate the message. I think that's a big thing right here. Is and when I say delegate the message, I think there's also a degree of that where it delegates a little bit of kind of the emotional weight of the organization. Is, can we as a leadership team spread out a little bit of this emotional weight? So it's not just that, that one key leader or those 2 or 3 key leaders that are responsible for constantly championing the cause, the mission, the vision, and everything. Those are maybe 2 things that we see quite a bit of, that we are, really trying to help leaders kind of develop a bit of a common language around and then really execute in their own space.
Yeah, absolutely. I see those everywhere. And you have some unique aspects to it as well, kind of going upstream from your military experience. But yeah, leaders are leaders today. It's unbelievable, the loneliness, isolation piece. And that's, if you haven't been a leader, that's not what you'd experience, because they got people around them all the time. And they have, the phrase that I hear all the time, Brandon, is people need me all the time. Everyone needs me all the time, moving from these different environments at work and then heading home. And often the leader is impoverished with the space, the time, the energy, even to think, to make quality decisions, to have space in the calendar to like go to the bathroom, or like have an hour between meetings where there's nobody walking in their office. And we have to go upstream and solve for these things, or we're going to have pretty poor decisions made at the top. And I know we're fighting for some of the same things with leaders on that. Perseverance. This is a big one for you. So, title of the book: Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance. All right, split hairs for me and tell me more.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it. So, where endurance is in many ways just kind of surviving, we would say that endurance is valuable. It's valiant, right? It's kind of getting through a defined period of hardship. Perseverance is far more thriving. This is transforming amidst change and uncertainty to become the leader that the situation calls for, so that you can grow through it and not just go through it. that's kind of the big difference that we talk about in terms of, endurance versus perseverance. One of the illustrations that we really like to use is, think about like a marathon. A marathon is kind of like one of those peak endurance sports, right? And it's a known quantity. No matter where you are, where you're running it, the course is going to be 26.2 miles, right? So it's a known quantity. You know that you're going to start the course. You know how to prepare for it. You know what the map looks like. You know where the aid stations are going to be. You probably know you're going to hit a wall at some point in there, but you'll get through it. You'll endure because you have trained and prepared for it. So in this way, when you're enduring through anything in life from point A to point B, by the time you get to point B, you're essentially a more tired version of who you were at point A. It's not the same with perseverance. By the time you get to point B, you are not the same person who started the course at point A. You have grown, you have transformed to become the person that the situation calls for because the course hasn't been marked. You're hit with things that you don't know if your training has prepared you for it. You have to make those choices. And in doing so, you get to grow through the experience so that not only do you achieve what you have persevered through, but you become a leader who knows how to persevere because it's going to happen again. You're going to get hit with change again. And the way that in the book, we try to equip leaders with a useful framework to hold on to in the midst of the adversity that they're facing, by suggesting that perseverance has 5 factors: change, uncertainty, acceptance, choice, and growth.
Which one of those do you find yourself focusing more on with leaders right now? Which of those aspects?
I think right now it's the acceptance and choice right now. And I think that those are kind of you might call those the trigger points into growth. Because I think what happens is that, change, yeah, we're all hit with change. Uncertainty, you literally can't pick up a paper right now and not read the word uncertainty in it. So I think the awareness is in the space right now. People are clear that there's a lot of change and uncertainty. I would say where we try to, or where we're helping leaders really kind of put their finger on something here is, we share with them the thing about uncertainty is that it actually piques a basic human emotion, and that emotion is fear. We're scared of the unknown. The human brain craves certainty, and it becomes this thing that can become like the friction that holds us in place, right? That fear. And so what we share is like, look, we either run from our fear or we run toward our purpose. It's a choice that we get to make. It's not easy, but that's where we get into a lot of the acceptance and choice aspects. With acceptance, we talk a lot about the trichotomy of control. What can I control? What can't I control? What can I influence? We talk about, expending energy in the right direction as it relates to each of those components, because I mean, really, what are we going to do? You can keep smashing your head against the same wall that you cannot control, or you can shrink the world down to what you can control and start making choices in service of your mission amidst all of the change and uncertainty. Those are some of the key areas. And then as you go from that acceptance to choice aspect, Blaine and I share with each other all the time, Blaine being our co-founder of Applied Leadership Partners and our co-author of our book, is, when you get to that aspect, people truly in life, you don't get credit for what you can do. You get credit for what you do. So you have to actually make a choice. It's nice to have all these decisions, but I think sometimes we get a little lost in optionality.
Or it's hard to have all these decisions. Sometimes I'd rather have one than 10.
Exactly, right? And I bet you're seeing it with the leaders that you're working with as well, is like you have so many options in front of you. That's where shrinking the world down to maybe a couple of things. What are our priorities of work like right now, in this quarter, in these next couple months? What are some of the things that we need to get across the goal line in order for us to set the conditions to take some steps towards, the vision that we have cast out in front of us? It's those choices. And not only those choices, but it's we share all the time. When you get to choice, it's not only making those difficult choices, shrinking the world down, but it's also choosing to become your stated values, creeds, ethos, all the things that you tell people that you are, you get to choose that over and over again when you're really persevering.
The thing I want to poke at and just see kind of where you land on this. Obviously, we live in a time of uncertainty. And like you say, that peaks fear. We're leading out of our limbic brain, i.e., we're not making good decisions in uncertainty. And yet, also in that, people crave certainty, which my opinion is we're never actually going to get that. That's a false need or false desire. But right there in the middle is actually clarity. Like we can fight for clarity, and you're talking about shrinking things down. Instead of think 3-year vision or 10-year vision, think 90-day goals. Uh, would you land on a similar thought pattern that we actually can't find certainty? And so it's actually worth breaking that down and fighting for clarity?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that clarity gives us agency in the midst of the chaos. And I think that that's really where we're really seeing a lot of leaders vectoring in on that, because if it's so wide and nebulous, what can you do, to really affect the company, the problem set, whatever it is. I think shrinking the world down in that regard, getting that clarity, getting super clear on what you actually can affect, I think that is very agency inducing, and that helps us get out of the, limbic brain, like our limbic system gets hijacked when fear peaks, right? We're automatically in that fight, fly, freeze mode. And we have to, we talk a lot about some of the techniques that we learned when we were in the military about really like slowing things down, like activating your breath control, making sure that you can onboard your parasympathetic nervous system so that you can get out of the limbic and get into your prefrontal cortex and actually get a little bit of clarity, as you have said, so that you have the agency to make some decisions and then kind of take a couple of small steps, right? One thing that we share all the time from our experience in the military is that when the bullets start flying, the first thing that the people will do is they're going to look to their leader. And what their leader does, they will replicate. And so you have to learn to model some of that calm in the chaos. And I think that that helps you start to see more clearly, Alan.
I was never in the military, but growing up in sports, the very moment with the most pressure at the end of the game is actually when you need to think most clearly, but we're likely to get spun up. And it really seems like those times of chaos, high fear that we're in now are separating those leaders who are great from the leaders who are pretty good, or even solid leaders who can slow down the situation, who can shrink it. And it's a little bit of a mind bending thing because you think, oh, for years we hear think big, dream. But actually, what you're saying is the leader that can say, here are my priorities this week, here's what my schedule looks like. I totally understand what you're talking about with persevering instead of just enduring, thriving instead of just surviving. What are a couple other aspects besides change? What are a couple key areas that you talk about in the book and that your work focuses on with teams to be able to essentially move from a good leader to an amazing leader?
Yeah, one of the things in the uncertainty chapter, we really start to descend into the particulars of how to lead others through uncertainty, and we looked at the opportunity to share these insights with the world as an opportunity to, I would say, equip leaders with ways not only for them. I think a lot of stuff that we talk about in the leadership space is very self-oriented, and we wanted to kind of shift the aperture. Yes, you do have to, gain a little bit of, control of self and all this kind of stuff, but that is in service of leading others. And so when we talk about leading through uncertainty, and we use a lot of military illustrations, I share the story about in 2006, I participated in the Best Ranger competition. And so the Best Ranger competition is, they call it like the Iron Man on steroids. It's 60 miles in 60 hours, no planned rest. There's all these different events that happen in the midst of it. I mean, you're doing obstacle courses, you're fighting with pugil sticks, you're doing weapons, you're jumping out of helicopters, you're all this different stuff, right? It's a heck of a exhausting event. But anyways, There are two big separators in this, and one of them is called an unknown distance road march. And so an unknown distance march is kind of very simply stated, put all your gear on. So think 65-pound rucksack, another, call it 25 pounds of gear with your weapon and helmet and all this kind of stuff. And the task is go until somebody says stop. And oh, by the way, if you go slower than a 15-minute per mile pace, then the bus that is behind you, the Bluebird, will catch you and you're out of the competition, or you're out of the assessment and selection, wherever you're experiencing this unknown distance march. It's maddening, Alan, because everybody who toes the line for this thing, these guys are rangers, right? They're gritty, they're tough, they're strong, they have endurance, they're smart. It's not the physical strain, it's the mental strain of the unknown that really breaks people. And so just to kind of stay on this theme and really talk a little bit deeper about it, what we find is that what happens is that people will create false finish lines. They'll start to predict and they'll say things like, oh, surely they're going to stop us at mile 16. So they break come mile 17, right? Because they've already established that false finish line. And we see this all the time in the business sector, right? It's remember back to the COVID time, hey, are we going to be back by, Easter? Hey, are we going to be back by, keep filling in the blanks? You see it today, hey, when do you think that, whatever, tariffs are going to settle out? When do you think rates are going to settle out? Do you think this? Do you think that? We start to reach for false finish lines. And when I was in the Best Ranger competition and we were, getting going, I mean, first of all, I have to tell you, I don't even remember the first 10 miles of it because I was just like so droned out. I was exhausted. But we talked to leaders about things like look for those signs of unsettling, like my partner Jeremiah looked for in me. Like he saw my signs of unsettling. I'm a very vocal guy. I wasn't saying anything for the first couple miles, and he's like, uh-oh. So look for signs of unsettling in your teammates. Those signs of unsettling could be absence of normal behaviors. It could be the presence of abnormal behaviors. It could be that teammate who is constantly on time with all of their tasks. And then all of a sudden they're starting to slip. That might be a sign of unsettling. We talk in those moments about, hey, ask the real questions, not how are you doing? Because you're going to fall into the teenager conversation. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Ask the questions. We talk about and tell the truth. If you're one of the people, like I needed to tell my buddy, in the Best Ranger competition, I am not doing well right now. I am struggling right now. And then allow another to provide some of that help. Is there something we can do to redistribute the load, right? Look at our teams. Where are you right now? Where are you overwhelmed? Is there a priority shift that we need to look at together? Because that's another thing that happens a lot. With all this change and uncertainty, an organization might be working on, bringing a product to market, but that might shift radically based on different circumstances. What we need to do as leaders is look for those signs of unsettling, look for those signs of frustration, and then be able to sit down and say, hey, do we maybe need to restack our priorities right now? It's not that this is any less important, but it just might be that we need to restack some things to get through these next couple legs of our journey. And that's another aspect of it, is extending the time horizon is really important. Blaine and I talk to leaders a lot about this. Yes, you're under a lot right now. You're experiencing the pressure. You've just gotten like popped in the mouth with change. It's brought about more uncertainty. And can we maybe extend the time horizon? What's the mission that we're on right now? The moment right now that we're experiencing is very difficult. Be affirmed in that. If you're experiencing this and you're having a hard time, there's a word for you, and the word is normal. You're a human being. That's okay. And giving permission for people to experience that. And what is the mission that we're on right now? What are we actually trying to achieve with our business? What is the value that we're trying to bring to the customers, the communities that we serve? Can we extend the time horizon? And in doing so, one thing that we share oftentimes with leaders is let's just remember that the mission is greater than the moment. The moment is difficult right now. The mission is greater. And if we can kind of take our eyes off of our feet and look up at that North Star that we're tracking towards, we can probably get through this a little bit smoother than we're experiencing right now.
Yeah. So, and it feels a little paradoxical, but I think I know what you're saying here. In one sense, we need to zoom out and extend the horizon. In another sense, we need to shrink that. When should we do each of those?
Oh, I think it's a constant process. I think it's a constant process of doing both. I think in many ways, you look at a lot of the work in effective organizations that are self-referring organizations is the term. That's very like Dr. Margaret Wheatley oriented. Yeah, yeah. A self-referring organization understands who they are, what they do, who they serve, and can then navigate the complexities of a changing world because it's what you do doesn't change. How you do it changes. And that is that kind of zoom out while zooming in. And a lot of that is done with a good sense of communication across the board. That's the kind of the connecting line between all of those, especially in unique, discrete elements of the organization, is having that shared consciousness of what that big mission, what that big vision is, so that you can do what you need to do in the midst of the change. I would say that's how the paradox kind of comes through is you don't change what you do or who you are and who you serve. You change how you do it. And I think it's the leaders that are unwilling to decouple from how we do it that get stuck. And they get stuck in that, and they kind of end up just kind of staying stuck in that because they don't want to let go of the how, even though the world has moved on. Doesn't mean, you saw it in COVID, right? It was the restaurants that shifted their paradigm, that figured out we still are who we are as a restaurant. We still serve the customers that we serve. That's what we do. We want to delight people by providing them with, good, nutritious food, whatever. Well, how do we shift that? Okay, well, let's shift it to move to our customer instead of forcing our customer to move to us because the world has changed. Those are the ones that thrive through that adversity. The ones that kind of locked down and said, we're going to close our doors and we're going to get through it because I think we're going to be back by Easter. They were gone come summer.
Yeah, strategy, always shifting, posture, always shifting. And yet, no, here's how we uniquely serve the world. And it's just going to need to shift. Other than those not making shifts right now, what other leaders are being left behind right now?
I would have to touch into some of the ones that are just flaming out. I mean, they've rocked it till the wheels fall off, and the wheels fell off.
We've been on overdrive for a long time.
Yeah, they got nothing left. I mean, there's no, you know, you got to be able to modulate, your energy here. You got to be able to take a break. And I think that, you and I we were just talking about this in terms of keep the big vision, the strategy in mind, but also know, I love Eisenhower's, classic quote, like, plans are worthless, but planning is everything, right? We plan to prepare for an uncertain future, not to predict a future that we cannot be certain about. And part of that planning, I think, which you alluded to earlier, is like, okay, what am I going to do this week? If you can't tell me that you can't schedule in an hour for you to get some fitness in, to get some movement in 5 days a week, like, I'm sorry, but if you're a leader and you happen to see that your people are flaming out as well, take a look at your schedule first, because if you're not modeling that, you can't give it to them. So can you find spaces, right? Program it in there. I think that we're seeing a lot of that. We're just seeing a lot of that burnout. We're seeing a lot of, Blaine and I call it identity asymmetry. We get so over-identified with being leader and being CEO or COO or whatever of given organization. It's like, well, yeah, but what about the rest of your life?
Yeah, that's good. Talk about false finish lines, and a false finish line for some leaders, resting and stopping feels like quitting or feels like a false finish line. And if we're going to go the distance, then planned rest, and maybe that's a rest stop versus a finish line, is really, really important. We're heading into summer, usually a time when people can create more space and actually go love their families well and be a little bit more invested there. Talk about false finish lines versus those rest stops, those planned stops along the way.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I often share, if I hope you don't mind me sharing another little bit of a military analogy, but you know, when you're operating deep in enemy territory, um, even a platoon of U.S. Army Rangers programs in stops. So think about that. You're in enemy territory, you're surrounded, you might say like there's nothing you never can stop, when you're in that kind of circumstance. Not true. We actually, if you're on a long movement, you program in tactical halts. You program in times where you can get your wits about you. Make sure, check on the team. Is everybody hydrated? Change your socks for God's sakes, because you're going to trash your feet. Redistribute some weight. All of these things, and I share that with leaders all the time that are operating in a myriad of different market spaces, because the whole point is like, look, if you can do that in a combat zone, I kind of feel like we can make space to do that in finance or healthcare or ministry or nonprofit, whatever you're doing. Like, I really kind of think that we can figure that out. And I think it's very different than establishing, those false finish lines. I think those false finish lines are the things that we have no agency, no control over. And when we try to like project something out, but if you want to kind of stay in the game for the long haul, and if you want to be effective for the long haul, taking those tactical halts here and there, I mean, that's mission critical. That's not a nice to have, that's a need to have.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. And I think that's a good reminder. Anybody listening, watching, if you have not planned those in this summer, they will not just present themselves. I mean, maybe a half day at a time they will. Or, oh, we get off at noon on Fridays from our organization. But leaders, there's always by nature more to do. And our brains will tell us you can't fall behind by doing this. Summer is a beautiful time to pull back. And I like that, for a tactical halt, crucial for the mission, not just for next fall, but what about 3 years from now? And we just stop thinking deeply when we don't have that time and space. So I really love this time of year. We actually halt our recording, and we record a lot this month so that we can actually get fresh ourselves, so that our content just doesn't get dry. Our thinking doesn't get dry, in addition to coaching and other areas. Let's get personal for a minute here, Brandon. I'm curious for you. I've been thinking about the compounding effect recently. What are those little things that over time bear big fruit? What are 2 or 3 small habits in your life that are bearing huge fruit these days?
Oh man, gosh, I love our conversation right now, Alan. One of the things that I do every single morning before anything is I mean, I feed Daisy first, my dog. She's a sweetheart. But I sit down. For me, my morning time of about 30 minutes. I start with a practice of gratitude. I crack open my Bible. I spend some time in God's Word. I spend some time in prayer and in reflection. Currently, I'm in a year-long word study on chun, which is the Hebrew word for steadfast. So that's been really life-giving for me. Another thing for me is physical fitness, man. Like 6 sessions a week. I rest on Sunday. That has been really life-giving for me, especially as my fitness has adjusted over time. I'm no longer a airborne ranger with my hair on fire, screaming all over the world. Like I have had to change from a performance mindset to a wellness mindset, and that has been really helpful for me, because I do want to stay in the game for the long haul. Another thing is dating my wife. Dating my wife has been critical. It's a little tougher right now. She is actually in nurse practitioner school, but we program in one night a week just to have a date with each other. And then, Sundays we attend church, and then we always have brunch together, which has been really nice. But those have been really life-giving investments that have just compounded into a lot of goodness over time.
That's great. Always love hearing from the leader. What personally are you experiencing that's cascading, more toward others in different parts of your life? What else? What else haven't we covered here today that you're thinking about the person on the other side of the camera or who's driving in traffic that needs to hear one more thought or nugget today?
Yeah, if you are going through a hard time right now, some brand of growth or change or adversity, you're facing a lot and it feels like it's coming at you from all directions. Um, I would say what I think you need to know is that number one, you're normal. Number two, you're not alone. There are plenty of other leaders that are going through that. And I would encourage you that if you don't have some of those kind of relationships to, reach out, find somebody, find a coach, find a mentor, find just another buddy that you can talk to about this kind of stuff. And you can persevere through this, and in doing so, grow. And that's honestly why we really wrote this book, is that we really wanted people to know, look, you're not alone out there. What you're going through is really freaking hard. You know, we're military guys. Blaine was a Green Beret. I was a Ranger. So we share some stories in the book about leading in those austere environments. But nobody holds a monopoly on adversity. Like, we're all experiencing difficult things out there. And, we hope that that you're not alone. And if you're having a hard time, that makes you totally normal. And reach out, like, we can get through this. There's a lot of stuff that we can do to get through this together. And I do believe that is what is going to move our communities forward in this time, is if we kind of shrink the world down, lean a little bit into each other, and, start making some good choices and getting through it.
Awesome. Brandon, loved our conversation. Next time, let's get a coffee in person here in Colorado. Friends, go ahead and grab that book. Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance. We've got all kinds of info for you below in the show notes. Thanks for being with us today, man.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.